So we're back in with part 2 of our Friday night developer stream recap for Marvel's Avengers. It was definitely a longer stream, and that's the reason I've had to split it into 2 recap videos. The first one I'd done earlier on today, that was a Q&A with Christopher Judge. He's also known as the voice of Kratos from the God of War games. He'll be voicing Black Panther, of course. That was a really interesting one. He seems a really fun and intelligent guy, so I'd recommend checking that one out if you haven't done already. But for part 2, this is focusing more on the narrative rather than the voice acting side of things. So you've got a Q&A with Evan Narcisse, he's a narrative consultant, and also Hannah Macleod, who is a game writer as well. It's a pretty long video, but the reason being there was a lot of interesting stuff in, and I didn't want to cut too much out. Yes, I want these videos to be relatively concise, but I don't want to cut out any interesting information either. So as always, enjoy this. If the video is helpful, take the time to hit the like, share and subscribe button, and I'll see you all again soon.
You are our narrative consultant. What does that mean?
Basically, it means I help with story, right? So from top to bottom, what are the game mechanics? We're hearing some ambient audio from you now, Hannah. So like, what are the game mechanics? How can the story, the narrative design, like reinforce the game mechanics, right? How can the game mechanics inform the game design, right? So how to hook those two things together really tightly in a satisfying way. So that's everything from, okay, does this plot point make sense given the things that the character can do in the game? Given the things that the character can do in the game, how can we make the gameplay more interesting or differentiated? What are the character relationship dynamics? Like, why do these people hate each other again? How can we drive that home more? What's their relationship to the game world? What do they do when they're not doing superhero or adventurer stuff? So it's kind of thinking about the story that the game is trying to tell holistically. Thinking about the game design as part of that. They're not two separate things. And, basically, it could mean everything from reading the whole script of a game and giving feedback. It can be writing a side quest, coming up with ideas of other side quests. It can be figuring out a character's backstory and writing their lines. So it depends on the particular studio, the game, the project, what they are trying to achieve, what they feel they need help with, what I feel they need help with. It changes like with each different project, but with this one, it was pretty deep and involved. What did you say, Hannah?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. I have yes, I have headphones that both have ears on them because it's me. Definitely. I feel like Evan directed me a lot, and the other writers as well on the team, just in terms of remembering things about the character that are core to who he is, especially. And I don't think the movie gets into this as much, which is probably why it's so important to hone in on, is his scientist side, his intellectual side, because I think they lean in the movie very much on Shuri being the tech person and the science person. But it's so core to his character in the comics that he is intelligent and technologically gifted, and he'll upgrade his own suits and he'll come up with his own things. And so it was always important to make sure he was approaching everything from that mindset. He's not just a jock. he's not just going pummeling things and punching stuff. He really does approach things as someone who likes to thoroughly think through things and to kind of examine them and pick them apart, and so that was probably the biggest note Evan continually had me like thinking of is just, you got to remember that T'Challa is not just a superhero, he is an incredibly intelligent man. So yeah.
The next question pretty much just piggybacks directly off of that, and it's, what was it like working together for both of you?
Awful. Okay, you heard it here first, everyone.
No, it was amazing. When they told us that Evan was going to work with us, I think just about everybody in the studio flipped out. We have a lot of big fans. And so we actually brought Evan to the studio so he could see some of the stuff we were working on, and also so we could just talk to him. And we had a lot of people going, can we come into the room too? Like, can we sit in on this discussion? Because we really all, just want to hear his brain. I think I took a dozen pages of notes that day of just like, and it wasn't always stuff that was specifically having to do with like the plot points of the story. It was really just talking about all of the characters in Wakanda as people and what's important to remember for those characters and how to do them justice. I think that was something that was so important to us, is that we did these characters justice. And I feel very grateful that we've had Evan, because it gives us the confidence to really explore the stories inside Wakanda in a way that I don't think we would have had if Evan wasn't working with us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I mean, for my part, it was really fun, you know, like watching the story change and kind of evolve over the course of the development of this expansion was fascinating and fun, and being able to like help, you know, shape that evolution was great too. So yeah, some of the stuff like Hannah said about, you know, the various characteristics of T'Challa as a personality, that was good. But it's also, you know, like one of the things that was in the forefront of my mind, and the whole team for sure, is like, this is one of the first times that people will be able to return to Wakanda en masse, you know, like, you know, after the movie, you know, we saw a vision of Wakanda there that obviously, you know, captured people's hearts and minds. And, you know, yeah, there was pressure about following up on that, but also like, okay, this is a chance to kind of manifest a unique version of Wakanda as a country, as a culture, these characters. So I think that was the most exciting thing for me, was like, these guys had really thought about, okay, what does Wakandan history look like? How do they honor that history? And you see that in the architecture of the game, the way this version of Wakanda looks. And then, you know, you think about, okay, what's different about this T'Challa? You know, and to me, he's very different. You know, his personality is different than the T'Challa we saw in the movie, and even in the comics. You know, I think they've kind of staked out some unique ground here.
This is for both of you, what were your influences in building the narrative for our version of Wakanda? Any specific?
I mean, I have specific comic runs that I could probably reference. Interestingly, and I don't want to get into why, the Flags of Our Fathers run, where Cap comes to Wakanda during World War II, ended up being quite influential in how we crafted the backstory for our characters. I had never heard of that run, and it's very fascinating to see a different Black Panther, because you're so used to seeing T'Challa. So to have Azuri and see that kind of background, it really hit home how important it is to have a set history in mind when you're writing this character, because he comes with all of the history behind it. So you have to be very clear, okay, in our version of Wakanda, this is the history, this is how it's led up to here, here's how these things happened. Rise of the Black Panther also, very much so. I think in addition to the Wakandan history that sort of sits on everything, the family history of T'Challa also really influences everything he does, because there's these key tentpole moments in T'Challa's life that influence who he is as a leader, and so it was very important for us to see, you know, which of those things established in the comics we wanted to take and which we wanted to adjust, so that we got T'Challa to the point that he is in our game. So those would be two big ones for me.
For me, I'm a huge Christopher Priest fan. So the work that he did on the character in that title in 1998 is influential to me, and I think everybody who's written Black Panther afterwards. And, you know, in particular, probably 3 storylines, Enemy of the State 1 and 2, where, you know, there is basically Wakanda, Atlantis, and the Kingdom of Lemuria, which is populated by a genetic offshoot of humanity called deviants. They all come to the brink of war, and Magneto gets involved. So like, one of the things that I love so much about the Priest run is that like he really helped develop this idea of what I call like superpowered statecraft, right? It's like, okay, yeah, you know how at the UN, like countries may argue, and you know, 2 countries that are at war may kind of have disagreements. You know, in the Marvel universe, you know, these countries have superpowers and they have super advanced technology, and you know, they might not necessarily want to abide by the let's play nice and be diplomatic rules. What happens when, like, you know, superpowered nations and superpowered rulers for nations almost come to blows. And I think that that's an idea that Peace explores so well in his run. So those two storylines. There was another storyline where Claw comes back and they have kind of another really intense reckoning, and T'Challa loses his control a little bit, and you see just how viscerally the kind of blood vengeance that he seeks against Claw affects him. You know, Claw is a character that can tip him over the edge because of the threat he poses. So, you know, those storylines, you know, I love Ta-Nehisi Coates' run on Black Panther a lot. I think he really delves into emotional dynamics of what it means to be a king, how heavy that duty weighs on you, you know, and what it means when the people you rule view you as something other than human. You know, they view the Black Panther as like the living symbol of their history, and that comes with like a lot of weight. So I think those are some things from the comics that we tried to bring into the game.
Absolutely.
So what is it like writing for a game that's continuously evolving and ongoing? Did that like ongoingness aspect of it factor into your writing? Is that something you took into account?
Oh, absolutely. And Evan's up to date on the game too. He was just talking to us about Clint the other day.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. It helps that the narrative team very much works as a collaborative. Like there's been a couple articles that have called me the narrative lead on Wakanda, and I wouldn't consider myself that, because our whole team worked very much together on the project, and it's often hard for us to remember who did what part, and Keanu and Nicole and Jess all contributed to that story together, and the usefulness of us working as a team like that is it meant that we knew what was going on the other packs, even though they were being developed simultaneously, and so we could make sure that everything fell in line together, and we're addressing this thing that happened when we introduced Kate and stuff like that. I really appreciate having a narrative team that is so communicative. Like we're they're on Slack right now talking to me. So we make sure that we're very much in constant communication, and Evan was getting stuff from all of us that we were writing and working on and trying to figure out, you know, how does this affect the world at large, the bigger storyline having to do with AIM, how we were going to use various villains, and that sort of thing. So it's tough only in the sense that any chess move we do is gonna affect all of the others, and so we just want to make sure that they're all in line with each other. But it's because we all work on everything that it's not quite as daunting as it could be.
So what makes our version of Wakanda different than ones that might exist in other mediums?
Oof.
I'm asking the hard questions.
Yeah.
I'll start on that a little bit.
Okay.
This version of Wakanda is not quite as isolated as ones in other media. You know, there was an attempt at establishing diplomatic relations before A-Day, so you know, their existence is known to some people in the world. You know, the exact coordinates, debatable. You know, are they inviting anybody in? No, definitely not. So, you know, I think, you know, this version of Wakanda is not just a kind of like whispered myth or legend, you know, like the people in higher echelons of political power know about it. Maybe does your average American citizen? Maybe not, you know, or they don't want to believe it. So I would say that, you know, from the kind of outsider perspective, the rest of the world, that's one major difference. I also think because of some of the changes that we made to this version of T'Challa's backstory, the political mood in the country is probably a little bit different. You know, T'Challa himself is different. and I'm gonna probably keep on beating that drum for as long as we talk about this, because this version of T'Challa I think is very different, more arrogant and more aloof, and probably a little bit more aggro, more aggressive. So, and I think that trickles down to the rest of the country, right? You know, like, our king's a badass. He's managed to, like, you know, keep us safe, and, you know, he's got a really strong will, and, you know, the threat that KLAUE poses, which is the biggest threat that this version of Wakanda has ever faced, you know, it makes T'Challa and everybody around him rethink his approach, his personality, and so I think, again, you know, the average Wakanda citizen in this game probably trusts in their king a lot, and they've never seen him kind of falter or reconsider himself. So that probably makes them have, as citizens, a confidence in his abilities that is probably an extreme confidence that then gets shaken by an extreme threat.
There's definitely a lot of reverence toward T'Challa, I think, in our Wakanda because of that. He's less collaborative than we may have seen him in other places. He's much more, this is my job, this is the thing I have to do, this is the weight on me. So that's definitely true. I think it's also important to note that he's a lot older than necessarily he was in the movie. He's not new to being king. He's been king for quite a while. And so that comes with it sort of a confidence of experience. So that makes him quite a bit different. I think we still wanted to draw from Wakanda all of these important characters, like OKOYE and Salvavari, who's a comic book character that we pulled for the game, who I really love. And so we still grounded it in the comics, but we wanted our T'Challa to be in a place where he didn't think he needed the Avengers. And that he's been doing it on his own for so long that there's no reason for him to think that he's ever going to come across something where he might want other people to join forces with him. And that also contributes a lot to his relationship with Shuri in our game, which I think is very different from pretty much any other version of their relationship. There's a wedge between them. Due to a lot of that backstory that you'll get from playing the game. Trying really hard not to spoil anything. But there's a wedge between them due to some of the stuff that's happened in their past that they're going to be spending some time working on in this pack.
Here's another question that will test your unspoiling mettle. How is it writing our versions of Black Panther, Shuri, OKOYE, and KLAUE?
Okay.
We're testing you guys. This is a test.
Well, I'll start by answering about KLAUE.
Go ahead.
Again, this version of KLAUE is different too. You know, like you know, in the comics we've seen KLAUE as a would-be colonizer. You know, as a somebody who's basically out to kind of steal this amazing natural resource of vibranium from Wakanda. You know, the movie kind of put him as more of a mercenary who was only out for his own profit and ran afoul of a very aggressive warrior nation. Here, you know, he too is more of a scientist, right? He's not leaning on anybody else to make the gadgets and technology that he needs to achieve his ends. That's pretty much coming from him. I mean, he is in partnership with AIM, so they provide him with support, but, like, you know, this is clearly a vendetta that he's been chasing his whole life. And that's a breadcrumb. That's not a spoiler. Yep. Counting on you to keep me honest, Hannah.
Will do.
So yeah, the KLAUE is different in that way. You know, Shuri, I think, you know, in previous versions of the T'Challa and Shuri relationship, you know, you've seen sibling rivalry. You know, in the comics, Shuri is mad aggressive. You know, she's cocky, she's arrogant. You know, and when she you know, became the Black Panther in the comics, she was really not trying to listen to anybody. So this version here is, like Hannah said, more collaborative, you know, than T'Challa. and more social, you know, like, you know, it feels weird to say, but she kind of feels like more of a teenager here than in the movie, you know?
Yeah.
Because we get a sense that, oh, you have friends and you hang out and you know, you're on TikTok all the time.
In some ways, it also kind of feels like she's been protected from some of the darker things.
Yes.
She's definitely been sort of shielded from some of the harder stuff.
And she's more, I think, optimistic.
Yeah.
You know, and T'Challa, again, you know, this is a dude who, I think, as the embodiment of Wakanda, right? Like, he takes some of those ideals to heart a lot more than in other iterations. So, you know, like, he's a lot more isolationist than, you know, other versions of T'Challa from the comic and the movie. You know, I also think he's a lot more angry, you know, like with you know, good reason, but and that anger comes out in different ways. T'Challa, I think, mostly in latter day interpretations of him, has been written and portrayed as somebody who has his emotions under control. But I think that's true of this version. But like, when he gets angry, you know it and you feel it.
Definitely.
And it feels deeply felt.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of Okoye's character, the comics were kind of essential for understanding her as a person and understanding the Dora Milaje. There's some really, really excellent stuff in Ta-Nehisi's run about the Dora Milaje and who they are and what their role is. And I think we drew a lot of that into Okoye's character as well as other Dora Milaje that show up in the game. I didn't know from the movie. You get a very sort of one-dimensional view of who Okoye is and what her relationship with T'Challa is like. But in the comics, it's so much more layered than that because there's this whole weight of the Dora Milaje's history again that influences who they are and what their role was in Wakanda. Originally, they were potential wives for the Black Panther, and that's part of the honorifics and things that they use with Black Panther. So there's that kind of you know, that's not the way it is anymore, but there's that sort of very like relationship between like the Dora Milaje and their panther has a particular weight to it that was really fun to play with in terms of Okoye, of how much can she question what T'Challa does and how much does she still, you know, she's meant to serve the Black Panther, she's meant to protect the Black Panther. So there's sort of that dynamic of, you know, we don't want her to be too disrespectful, but also it's Okoye, so she you know,
sometimes you really should listen to me, Mike.
Exactly. So yeah, that was a really fun balance to come up with, and just getting to read all of the Dora Milaje stuff in the comics. They're so cool. I'm such a fan of them. I hope we get to do more with them. And then from T'Challa and Shuri, I think we've kind of talked around that a lot. I think Shuri's been really fun to include, just in terms of how she relates to the other Avengers too, because that's quite different. You know, not all of the Avengers in our game have necessarily met or been in Wakanda in other iterations like Kamala, and so getting to sort of see how T'Challa would react to Kamala and Shuri would react to Kamala has been pretty fun because she's such a fangirl and she's so earnest, and it's a little bit different than, you know, how Tony Stark reacts to Wakanda.
Yeah.
All right, so this is from a player, Pewter Odin. What is both of your favorite parts of working on the expansion? I know, all these like weird spoilery territory things that you gotta like weave around.
I think for me, my favorite part was getting to figure out what T'Challa's opinion is of the other Avengers. To figure out like how he would feel about these various characters after A-Day and how he would feel about the decisions they made after A-Day and what decisions they're making now has been really, really fun to figure out because it's different depending on which hero he's talking to. And we really like, there was a lot of discussions back and forth in the narrative chat of, okay, how would T'Challa feel about Tony, who like was living in a trailer, and how would he feel about, you know, Kamala being a young teenager, being part of the Avengers. So those are really fun things to figure out, is specifically T'Challa's opinion on the various Avengers as they appear in our game.
Yeah, and you know, the Avengers' opinions of T'Challa and Wakanda, right? You know, like let's just say it's a mild crisis of faith for Tony. You know.
Yep.
But I thought I was smart.
Yeah.
I thought I had cool stuff. Well, you do.
But also, can you share all this cool stuff with me?
Yeah,
please?
yeah. And then the response to that is probably what you expect. But yeah, you know, like, you know, T'Challa and Shuri are gonna see, they're gonna have rivalry with some characters. They're gonna have camaraderie with others. You know, they're, you know, going to be impressed by some of the capabilities that these other characters bring to bear. So, you know, it's like very much a getting to know you kind of dynamic for a lot of the game, and that was really fun.
Yeah.
We have a question from Carrot Scraps. This one looks like it's more for you, Evan. As a consultant, how do you guide writers making a new take on an existing character without stepping on existing work and retreading ground while keeping the character's core true?
So, you know, I think, you know, the comics and the original source material are always the foundation, right? And part of engaging with the comics is acknowledging that they themselves have evolved, right? Like T'Challa, as a personality, his history has evolved over the decades, right? Like Hannah said, Dora Milaje were understood one way, but now they're understood another way, right? So keeping that sense of evolution in mind, I think definitely frees up people who are adapting these characters into mediums to also evolve them. You know, like the point is to tell a fresh story, find a new angle, and you know, when I was working on the Miles Morales game, you know, part of it was, okay, what makes Miles Morales different than Peter Parker, you know? And with this project, it was, okay, what makes this version of T'Challa, this version of Wakanda different than the other things we've seen before, right? But how can we also nod at, you know, those other histories, those other stories of Wakanda that we've seen in other medium? And I think this team does a really good job with it. You know, there's things about, like, you know, Wakandan history that are the same kind of beats historically, but like are made manifest in the game. Like I'm talking like physically as certain locations and whatnot. That's very different than the comics have done. And you know, there's a few moments where I was like, "Oh, that's really smart. Y'all thought about this." So, you know, part of it was just, again, supporting that work, and you know, like Hannah said before, pushing a little bit. You know, okay, remember this character is also this. You know, like here's, you know, one way their relationship could turn. So, you know, it's always finding a balance between acknowledging the history and the foundation that you're stepping off of, but also like looking upwards and outwards to where else you can take it, right? You're always carrying that history with you, right? And for a character like T'Challa, who again literally is the embodiment of a whole country's history and ideals, like that's such an important thing to keep hold of. And I think, you know, we tried our best on it.
Both of you, what do you guys want players to take or to get out of playing War for Wakanda?
You know, for me, like whenever I think about Wakanda, like from a story perspective, but also like a meta perspective, it's like the symbolism of what this place represents, right? Like Black achievement, Black excellence, you know, the spirit to endure and thrive in a world that doesn't often want to understand you or respect you. To do that anyway, that's what Wakanda realizes. That Wakanda is a realization of that idea. And we definitely tried to home in on that too. You know, like T'Challa's personality and the way he embodies his role as king is definitely a result of that kind of thinking, right? But also, you know, the thing that I think this story has in common with Rise of the Black Panther is, how do you present all of that to the world? You know, in a way that encourages collaboration and partnership versus fear and suspicion and greed. So I think, you know, there's like a meta narrative about what Wakanda means and symbolizes to people that you can also embed in the text itself. And I think we really tried to do that.
Yeah. I think for me, I want people to see the layers that exist for Wakanda that I think not everyone is aware of just by virtue of the movie being the most sort of popular thing. But there's a lot of really interesting layers to Wakanda in terms of the politics, in terms of the different tribes, in terms of the different roles in the government. You know, Wakanda is not one monolithic thing, and I think that's part of what makes it so much a source of hope, like Chris Judge said, which I almost cried when he said that. I want people to see that Wakanda is not just one thing. It means a lot of things for different people. And I hope that by the end of it, it's sort of stuck with you too, that Wakanda has left a mark on you as well. I think that would make me really happy.